The Logic of Faith.
What's up, 915? How are you guys this morning? I am truly astonished by the sheer number of people that got to church this early today. I don't consider myself to be like an especially angry person, but I don't think that anything compares to the rage that I feel when my alarm clock goes off the first day of daylight savings. And you guys are here this early by choice. So props to you. We're going to try really hard to get the energy going. Hope we all had plenty of coffee this morning. I know I had. But man, I'm so excited to be here. I'm so excited that you guys are here. We are beginning. It's a new series this morning called The Logic of Faith. It's a continuation of this series that just wrapped up last week called The Faith of Doubt. It's kind of two series back to back that are both based on a book by a guy named Tim Keller called The Reason for God. And it's a little bit of a departure of what we normally do, like how we normally teach as a church. We are big believers in expository teaching. We believe in the Word of God. We believe that we're enriched when we open it and we explore and we read it together. And this is a little bit of a departure from that, but I think it's really important. This is a series that would more so be categorized as more of like an apologetics series, right? There's a little bit less scripture involved, but the reason that I think that series like this is so important is because I think, unfortunately, there's a lot of people who feel like in order to be a Christian, I kind of have to turn off my brain to a certain extent. And what we've discovered over the last several weeks is that nothing could be further from the truth. In the first half of Keller's book, what we based our previous series on, it's kind of a number of intellectual answers to common objections to Christianity. And what we see is that the more that you peel back the layers on things that are kind of seen by some as like slam dunk objections to Christianity, you kind of find out that they're not as strong of arguments as you think. And that the more you peel back the layers, the more you realize that it might actually take more faith to doubt God and to doubt Christianity than to believe it. But in this next series, we kind of look at the second half of Keller's book, and he kind of shifts from defense to offense, so to speak. And rather than a number of answers to objections against Christianity, this series is going to be about a lot of logical and intuitive reasons or arguments in favor of Christianity. I think it's really important that we understand that as Christians, we should be encouraged to be thinkers. We should be encouraged to ask the hard questions, not only because we find out that our faith can hold up to it, we find out that the truth of Christianity holds up to scrutiny on an intellectual level, but what also happens is we begin to build a foundation. And I'm really scared. If I have one really big fear about the church, it's that so many of us as Christians, we're Christians because it feels good. And that's true for a lot of people who choose not to be Christians as well, is it's less of an intellectual decision, it's less of a decision on what I actually believe to be true and more of what feels better for me to believe. The problem is if I don't have a really strong foundation for why I believe what I believe, it's really easy for my faith to be shaken. And I wonder how many people have walked away from faith or they've said no to Jesus completely unnecessarily because they failed to build a solid foundation. And so we're going to continue. I know it's a little bit different. Some of you guys are like, man, when are we just going to open up the Bible again? But I think it's really important for us to entertain these questions, to understand that our faith holds up to philosophical and intellectual questions. And in this series, we're going to kind of reiterate a bold claim that Keller makes in his book. And what he says is he opens up part 2 where he kind of gives the reasons for faith, the reasons in favor of the Christian God. He makes a bold claim that he isn't really intending to give you an argument that there could be a God. Instead, what he wants to do is he wants to reveal that you actually already know intuitively that God is real. That's a really bold claim. How can anybody say that? After all, like you can't prove God. Like what a crazy thing to say. And I think it's a little bit less crazy if we understand where we would find God if he is real. And Keller says it this way. I love the way that he says this in his book. He says, when a Russian cosmonaut returned from space and reported that he had not found God, C.S. Lewis responded that this was like Hamlet going into the attic of his castle and looking for Shakespeare. If there's a God, he wouldn't be another object in the universe that could be put in a lab and analyzed with empirical methods. He would relate to us the way that a playwright relates to the characters of his play. If God is real, we're not going to find the clues of God the same way that a detective would find clues at a crime scene. Or it's not going to be the way that a scientist finds clues of something that can be bottled up and measured in a lab. If God is real, then the proof of him is going to be in the very fabric of the universe. It's going to be in the fabric of existence itself, and it's going to be in the fabric of our human existence. It's going to be revealed in the way that we're wired, and that's kind of where we're going to go this morning. Keller he talks a lot about the clues of God. There's these kind of like intuitive things that really reveal to us that we all kind of believe in God, whether we know it or not. And the first clue that we're going to unpack this morning is the problem of sin. None of you guys were predicting that that's where we were starting. Like, none of you guys thought that. You're like, all right, cool. This is a series where we're trying to convince people that they should become Christians. Let's start with sin, right? Like, if we're honest, a lot of people like choose not to be Christians in large part because of the way that the church talks about sin, because of the connotations that this conversation has. And what I want to kind of assert this morning is that I think a lot of this is unnecessary because I think so often we misunderstand what sin is. I think oftentimes we misunderstand the ramifications of sin and the conversation around sin. Many people believe that the Christian view of sin is bleak and pessimistic about the nature of humanity. Nothing could be further from the truth. And here's why I say that. Because whether you're a Christian or not, it doesn't take you very long to come to the conclusion that something in this world isn't working right. Something's broken. That there's not only something broken in our world, but there's something broken in the human condition. Everybody has a category for this. Probably, most likely, you call it human nature. And what do you mean by that? You mean that none of us are perfect. We all have the capacity and the tendency to do things that we regret, to make mistakes, to hurt other people. We look around in the world, and whether you're a Christian or you're an atheist, you see a brokenness in the world. You see suffering. You see things that are not right. As Christians, we call this sin. We have a framework. And what's really sad is that the Christian conversation around sin has become one that people think is one of condemnation and judgment. It actually should be a conversation of hope. And the reason why is because if it's not sin, if there is no God, if there's no way to make the wrongs right, then yeah, we kind of are hopeless. But if we understand that it fits into a biblical framework of sin, then not only do we identify the problem, but we actually know what the solution is. And in order for us to fully get this, in order for us to fully understand this, in order for this to be truly good news and a hopeful conversation, we have to confront our misconceptions around sin. Barbara Brown Taylor, she's an Episcopal priest, she says this in one of her sermons. She says, "Neither the language of medicine nor of law is adequate substitute for the language of sin." And I think those are probably primarily the two ways that we talk about sin, right? We either talk about it kind of in medical terms, if it's this incurable human condition. That's not totally right. Or we talk about it in legal terms of essentially like we're guilty of an offense, right? And so we deserve punishment for our offenses. She says, contrary to the medical model, we're not entirely at the mercy of our maladies. The choice is to enter into the process of repentance. We have a way out. Contrary to the legal model, the essence of sin is not primarily the violation of laws, but a wrecked relationship with God, one another, and the whole created order. And yet, I think a lot of us kind of were influenced, or maybe even we perpetuate these kind of not totally on the nose ideas of what exactly sin is. So what is it, right? Let's stop talking about what it's not. Let's talk about what it is. Well, where does the word sin come from? It comes from the story of the Old Testament, and it comes from a Hebrew word that I cannot pronounce because I can't make that sound, the K-H. So I'm going to say kata, and that's not how you say that word, but That's what I'm going to call it this morning. But this is where we get our English word for sin. And this word doesn't mean evil. It doesn't mean injustice. It doesn't even refer to doing something morally wrong. What this word means is it literally translates to miss the mark or to miss the stated goal. Think of an archer shooting an arrow at a target, and they're aiming for the bullseye. When they hit that center and they hit the bullseye, bingo, we got it. Mission accomplished. But when they miss, that's kata. That is, I missed the stated goal. I missed the mark. It doesn't necessarily mean something was morally evil. It just means that it doesn't hit the intended goal. So what is the goal? Well, in the very beginning of the story, we learn what God's purpose and his design for humanity was. In Genesis chapter 1, verse 27, it says, "So God created human beings in his own image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female, he created them." And I think a lot of you guys have probably heard this verse, but what you don't see is that the rest of the story in the beginning of Genesis here, the story right after this is the fall of humanity. That this actually directly ties in to what exactly sin is. See, sin, and this is how Keller defines it. I love the way that he defines it. He says, sin is seeking to become oneself, to get an identity apart from God. We often reduce sin to mean it's breaking God's rules, these divine rules, and because we broke the rules, now we have to be punished. It's not what sin is. Sin is missing the intended goal, and the intended goal was for humanity to find the entirety of their identity within the image of God, because that's how he created us. And immediately Adam and Eve say, that's not good enough for us. We need to find our identity in our own wisdom. And so they're tempted to eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil so that they will be wise, because their identity in God isn't good enough for them. And then their son, Cain, he kills his brother not because of bloodlust or because he thinks murder is a good idea. It's because he had put his identity in how impressive what he produced would be. And when God was not pleased with his offering, it made him angry, because Cain's identity was not in the God who created him. Cain's identity was somewhere else. This is what the Bible talks about as sin. It's not a matter of breaking divine rules. The very first of the 10 Commandments isn't what you would expect. It's simply, don't have other gods before me. This is what God tells his people. Sin is not a matter of doing bad things. Sin can often look like really good things that are put in a place that is meant to be occupied by God. In his Pulitzer Prize-winning book, The Denial of Death, anthropologist Ernest Becker explains that as newborn children, we learn very early on that self-worth or self-value, the value that I bring to the table, is the condition for life. And because of that, part of human nature is that all of us are desperately seeking what he refers to as cosmic significance. And he warns his reader, don't take that term lightly. That all of us as humans, we are yearning for some sort of cosmic significance. We are conditioned to deify whatever it is that we base our identity and value on, whether we're religious or not. The primary example that he uses is romantic relationships. Love is a crazy thing. And it's not crazy because it's crazy on its own. It's crazy because it's where so many of us tether our identity and our value. That we so often decide that my value is revealed by the way that somebody else feels about me and treats me. And it's why love, it makes us feel big things. It makes us do crazy things. It can fill us up. It can also destroy us. Because it's not just about love. It's about my identity. And maybe for you, it's something else. Maybe for you, the easier example is your career or your work or your abilities, your talents, the things that you bring to the table, that for you is how you justify your value. And because of that, your entire identity, whether you're a Christian or you're not, is in that. Or maybe your identity is completely wrapped up in being a parent, something amazing. And your identity as a parent has become the entirety of your identity. That's it. And so because of that, you read all the books, you do all the things, you're a little bit judgy towards other parents. Why? Not because you're a bad person, but because you have to justify your identity. And what happens when something outside of your control, because almost everything in life is outside of our control, what happens when something goes wrong? It's not just that there's a course that needs to be corrected, it's that there's no me left. My entire identity was built on something that was fickle, that was unsustainable. And here's the crazy thing. All of these examples are good things. Love, work, children, family, the gifts that God has given us. They're all incredible gifts from God that are given to us on purpose so that we would enjoy them. They're not bad things. They become sin when they become the ultimate thing. Sin is not doing something bad. It's finding your identity outside of the identity of Jesus. Becker says this in his book. He says, no human relationship can bear this burden of godhood. If your partner is your all, then any shortcoming in him becomes a major threat to you. What is it that we want when we elevate the love partner to this position? We want to be rid of our feeling of nothingness, to know our existence has not been in vain. We want redemption, nothing less. Needless to say, humans cannot give this. The problem with building an identity on something apart from God, even if it's something good, is that it is inherently unstable. Not just when we fail, but even when we succeed. Even when things go perfectly according to plan. It's easy to see the way that things crumble. If I have put my entire value and my entire identity in something and then it falls apart, it's easy to see how that shatters my core. What's really interesting, though, is even when we succeed, even when we accomplish our wildest dreams, even when life goes exactly according to plan, there's very few people who said, I got everything that I wanted and it was perfectly fulfilling. It's crazy how it's usually the opposite. Tom Brady, when he won his 3rd Super Bowl, somebody asked him, they said, how does it feel winning 3 Super Bowls? And he was really honest and he said, I thought it would be more fulfilling. Man, you can achieve everything that you set out to achieve, and there's still part of you that knows, like, man, I was expecting to find satisfaction here, and I didn't find it. I was expecting to feel ultimate value, to feel fully justified. The famous philosopher Kierkegaard, he talks about this same phenomenon, that we all have this inherent fear that we're insignificant. And because of that, we spend most of our lives essentially looking for a way to justify our existence. But no matter where we go to try to justify it, that fear, it doesn't go away. It's crazy. And so because of this, we start to experience consequences. This is why sin has consequences, not because we're bad and God has to punish us. It's because when we disconnect from where our identity is supposed to be, what we do is we set ourselves up for failure. We set ourselves up for hurt. We set ourselves up to have our self-worth, our entire identity completely rocked. This is why guilt, when we make mistakes, it overwhelms us. This is why we overcorrect and we cause damage to those around us. This is why we're so scared of people not liking or accepting us. It's why we lash out under stress. It's why political discourse struggles to be civil. Because if you come after my beliefs or you expose some perceived weakness in me, I can't afford to be objective and measured because the threat is too great. You didn't come after my belief. You didn't come after my ability. You came after my identity. And so we experience these consequences personally. The problem of sin is not that we do bad things, it's that we take good things that are unable to support the full weight of our entire identity and self-worth, and we put it in a position that only God can fill. And so we fail, and we hurt ourselves, and we hurt other people around us. We feel the consequences of sin personally, but we also see them socially. I'm going to make another bold claim that I would say that all of the injustice that we see in the world, it proves this biblical framework of sin. Because when anything other than God is our highest love, the very fabric of our society, it begins to crack. We look at the world and we see wars and division and perceived injustices. And we always see it from our own perspective. And it's tempting to see the world as in the middle of this struggle between good and evil. But that's not really what's happening in the world. You look at any global conflict, it's not as simple as good versus evil. What it usually is it's a bunch of people who have limited perspective, who have tethered their identity to something that cannot support it. But because it's their entire identity, they cannot do anything less than defend it at all costs. See, if my highest goal in life is the well-being of my family, I'm naturally going to care a lot less about other families. I'm going to protect my family even if it comes to the detriment of yours. If my highest goal is the welfare of my country, then I don't really care about other countries, and it's a lot easier for me to see them as potential enemies because they're threats to my identity. If my highest goal is personal happiness, I can justify an incredible level of greed in order to get ahead. And you see it all the time. You see Christians do it. And they make a greedy decision and they say, well, I've got to support my family. You see how these things that somebody else might perceive as evil, to you it doesn't feel like that. Because that's not what it is. What it is the natural consequence of you finding your identity in a place that can't support it. And so sin, even if it takes the form of something that looks and feels right, it's destructive. It doesn't just destroy us from the inside, it destroys the world around us. All right, Andrew, cool. This series, though, is supposed to be about intellectual arguments in favor of God. Like, how does this problem of sin, how does this framework of sin prove that God is real? I would say because intuitively we all have this feeling that we're supposed to be cosmically significant. And we look at all of the places outside of God where we can find that, and we see that it never works. There is this desire that is innate in our psyches. And there is no place outside of God where we've ever been able to satisfy it. Can I tell you, the reason that you desire cosmic significance is because you are cosmically significant. Because God created you in his image. He didn't create anybody else on earth. Like, he didn't create the animals or the trees in his own image. He created humans in his image. Your significance is astronomical. But the only way that it works is when we center ourselves on where our identity is supposed to be in the first place. When we understand that the only place, the only thing that can sustain the weight of all of that is our Creator God who creates us in his image. C.S. Lewis says it this way. He says, the Christian way is different, both harder and easier. Christ says, give me all. I don't want just this much of your time and this much of your money and this much of your work so that your natural self can have the rest. I want you, not your things. I have come not to torture your natural self. I will give you a new self instead. Hand over the whole natural self, all the desires, not just the ones you think wicked, but the ones that you think innocent, the whole outfit. I will give you a new self instead. Some of you, you've been Christians for a long time, but you still feel this strain on your soul. And I want to suggest to you this morning that the reason for that is that when you came to follow Jesus, you only partially repented. You knew that coming to faith in God meant you had to give up the things that were obviously bad. That you gave up your addictions. You gave up the way that you mistreat other people. You gave up anything that is an obvious sin issue in your life. You gave up the things that looked bad, but you held on to the things that you thought were okay to hold on to because they were good. And you wonder why you're not finding satisfaction in God, and it's because you're not trying to find satisfaction in God. You're trying to find satisfaction in the good things that He's gifted you. But it doesn't work. It's still sin. Again, sin is not, I did a bunch of bad stuff and now God has to punish me. Sin is I missed the mark. I missed the goal. The goal is for you to understand and embrace fully your identity inside the image of God. That your worth, your value, it's, for one, it's higher than you could ever imagine. But it's also something that you only find inside His image. That you only find when He is your source of self-worth, when He is your source of value, when He is your source of cosmic significance. Repentance isn't trying to be a better person. It's embracing a new person. It's embracing a new identity. So we're going to take communion here in just a few moments together. We do this every week. And when we're taking communion, it's not just some sort of like spiritual ritual so we feel good about ourselves. It's an intentional ritual that's meant to help us really reflect on what the work of the cross means. And I think today, the best way for us to reflect during communion is just to consider, what does it mean that Jesus died in order that I would find a new self? Where are the places where I'm finding my worth? Where are the places where I'm looking to find my identity? And is it working? Am I content? Am I satisfied in finding my entire significance inside of God's own identity? Is He truly enough? Or am I struggling with sin that I didn't know was sin because I misunderstood what sin was, and I thought as long as I was a nice person, that was God's entire plan for me? I'm just telling you, man, it's not sustainable. And if that's you this morning and you're feeling that and you're like, man, I have never said that out loud, but I feel that. I truly believe that God is here in this room this morning where He's always been, with arms open, saying, dude, just come here. Just come here. Don't try to figure it out over there. Those are gifts that I gave you to enjoy, but that is not where you're going to find yourself. You're going to find a perfect version of yourself in me. What's God calling you to give up? What's He calling you to lay down? It might not just be the bad stuff. It might be the good stuff. He is a loving God who gives us freely His love and just like this incredible gift of life and the incredible gift of family and the incredible gift of fruits of our labor. Like all of those things are incredible things that are gifts from God. But they have nothing to do with your value. They have nothing to do with your identity. Your identity is fully in Him. Let's take communion together.